It's Learning at Work Week, and this year's theme is Learning Uncovered. So this week it's all videos about lifelong learning in the workplace, how we can do it as L&D professionals, and why we should be encouraging it within our organisations. So I thought we'd kick the week off with a really simple look at exactly what we mean by lifelong learning, because this is a phrase that, if I'm honest, I'm not that keen on. I think it steers way too heavily, and certainly the conversation has in the past, towards the world of education. Now, this is not to say the world of education is bad, it's just that it doesn't really work in the workplace. And what I mean by that isn't that education is inherently non-translatable into the real world and the world of work, but that they look at two very different things. When we look at education, we look at philosophical truth, a broader understanding of a topic beyond what is immediately useful. Meanwhile, when we look at workplace learning, what we're usually trying to deliver is a competent workforce and then increased performance over time. Those are the real jobs of the L&D function within most organisations. So you can see why perhaps this isn't a phrase I use very often. But that doesn't mean we can't apply this idea of constant development into the workplace. And in fact, we already kind of have it in the world of continual improvement, performance management. These things are ultimately very similar to the concept of lifelong learning, but just niche down to things that are necessary within that workforce. And specifically, I want to talk about us as L&D professionals and how lifelong learning, or continual improvement, or CPD, or whatever you want to call it, is so important for us. And the example I'm going to use is actually from my own career. When I started 10 years ago, learning styles were taught as a scientific fact, a fundamental underpinning of how to formulate effective learning. If that happened today, you would demand your money back from that accredited body course. You know who you are, were, I hope you don't train it anymore. But if you weren't tuned into the industry, or indeed constantly challenging yourself, reading, talking to others, effectively engaging in lifelong learning, you might still think that learning styles is a scientific fact, that it's a good underpinning for everything that you do. In fact, I have this conversation fairly regularly, and it seems to be having a bit of a resurgence at the moment. And I think a solid part of that is because we don't engage enough in this kind of challenge, this lifelong learning within our roles. It's dangerous to think that, well, we've done this way for 20 years, my learning seems to be effective, and therefore I'll just carry on. In any other part of the business, that would be an outrageous statement. This is good enough, so we'll just never change. But then I guess the question becomes, how do we make sure that when we are engaging with the industry, when we are, engaging in lifelong learning or continual improvement, that we are actually improving, that we're not just, jumping on the bandwagon of the next new shiny toy, or being led down the garden path by some questionable science sometimes? Well, there's no one right answer, but there are a couple of resources that I like to use to make sure that I'm constantly exposing myself to things that I might not know, that I might disagree with, or that might in some way challenge what I've been doing for the past decade. My first suggestion are content aggregators. Now, I love these platforms simply because they do all the hard work for me. I tell them what sort of things I'm interested in and what I do. They bring me every single day a variety of content that I can choose to engage with or not, go back to later, or say I don't want and is not relevant to what I'm doing. Of these, some of my favourites are Refined, which is a great platform if you just want a variety of content chosen from a genre list and a kind of work role that you can create. Sidebar, which is really heavily focused on content development, code, UX, UI, whatever it might be you're interested in the development world. And FeedSpot. FeedSpot is much more broad, pulls in blogs, news articles, videos. It's a paid-for service, but I think it is well worth it. Next up, we've got communities, or more specifically maybe associations. I've done a video on communities in the instructional design world before, and they are fantastic for getting to know others in the field, working side by side, bouncing ideas around. But this space, I would say I'm more focused on accredited organisations or associations. These are usually paid memberships, but with that they bring not only the gravitas, if you will, of being a member of X, Y, and Z, which to be honest I don't particularly buy into, because all you've done is hand over money usually to gain that membership status. But what these places do have usually is a wealth of research, blogs, journal articles, events that you can attend, access to genuine experts, not self-styled LinkedIn self-announced experts or gurus or thought leaders, people who have done this for a long time, have done it well, and now want to share what they've learned. That to me is what those kind of organisations and associations can deliver that really nothing else can. Now, there are loads available, certainly in the L&D world. More in America, you've got ATD. In the UK, you've got organisations such as the CIPD and the LPI. They're all much of a muchness. CIPD is far more focused, of course, on HR. The LPI is slightly less formed around that expert principle, I would say, and is more about kind of offering members some level of accreditation based on years of experience. ATD I have very little experience with, but I've heard wonderful things from my American friends. Personally, I'm a big fan of the ISPI, the International Society for Performance Improvement. I think the journals they put out are phenomenal. The kind of experts they have at events, be them webinars or their conferences, which I've only ever been able to watch remotely, are just outstanding. And most importantly, it's not L&D focused. If we're talking about lifelong learning, we really need to remember to step back from our industry blinkers, to stop saying, I will see the world only through the eyes of L&D, and think about what we're actually in charge of in a business. Performance improvement to me is a fantastic example of how there's this whole other industry around performance that for some reason we don't look at very often. I'm talking about the worlds of HPI and HPT, things that I think every L&D professional should know about and practice, but very few do. I know I didn't for a long time, and once I got involved in that world, I was able to do things I was never able to achieve with just my knowledge of learning and content development. This last point is maybe going to sound a little bit boring, and maybe it's not your thing, but here we go. Books, journal articles, blogs. Now I say this as someone recording a video and putting it on YouTube, but these are amazing resources. And they're amazing resources exactly because they are not necessarily the quickest and easiest things to create. It's only going to take me maybe a couple of hours to formulate the idea, sit down and record, edit and post this video. But to write a book, to release a journal article, or indeed a full journal in some cases, takes long periods of time. Huge amounts of work, research and reflection go into creating these resources, which quite frankly usually means they are a better source for your personal development. Now, I'm not saying log off YouTube and never come back. Please don't. In fact, while you're here, hit the like button and subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what you think. But do engage in these more detailed, slower moving areas, because that is where you'll quite often find the roots of what everyone on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter is actually talking about. That's where you can engage in getting that broader understanding, and that's how you can maybe find your spin on things. Often, we're very tied into following, well, I learnt this model, so I follow this model. But when you speak to people who create models, that's not how they work. They don't get their information from YouTube or from LinkedIn or from Twitter. They probably get some there, but not really, not when they're forming their model, their way of working. In order to create your own way of working, your own approach to doing things, you have to fundamentally understand what's already in existence. And that means going to the source material. Doesn't mean getting a degree, doesn't mean doing expensive courses. Just buy a book, download a journal article. Google Scholar will give you access to thousands of them for free. Your local library will lend you a book. You don't have to invest money in this. But most importantly, if you do read something, talk about it, share it, ask others if they've read it, find people who have read it and discuss what you got from it versus what they got from it. Challenge yourself to think, will this alter what you're doing? So, lifelong learning. I said at the start it's a phrase that I have problems with, but I think after some reflection, this is where I'm landing. Lifelong learning in the workplace is different from lifelong learning as a whole. We are all, as human beings, engaged in lifelong learning. You can't not be. You're exposed to so much in the world, from visual and auditory stimuli to walking to the shops, you're going to learn something new maybe. You can't avoid being a lifelong learner. In the workplace, to me, what this means is that we're never saying, well, this is good enough. We're always challenging ourselves to say, I can be better, how can I be better? It's about asking those questions. And in a funny sort of way, it is. I was talking at the start of this video about how it's not about philosophical truth, and yet actually it goes right back to when we talk about the learning philosophers, we go right the way back to Socrates and that simple question of a life unexplored. We need to be constantly saying, what's the next thing? How can I be better? So there we are. We've gone from the learning at work week, lifelong learning, all the way back to Socrates, performance management. What more could you want? So those are some of the things that I think we should be doing as L&D professionals in the workplace to make sure we're embracing and modelling lifelong learning for everyone around us. But is there something you think I've missed? Is there something you're doing to embrace new challenge and push yourself to question how you can improve? If so, let me know in the comments. Obviously, before you go, make sure you like this video and hit that subscribe button because it wouldn't be YouTube if I didn't ask that for at least the second time.